Poland, Czechia, and Germany are already submitting requests to Ukraine to forcibly return Ukrainians back home. This is not some made-up story from the internet. These are the words of an official, namely the head of the State Migration Service of Ukraine, Naumenko, who gave an interview and directly reported this. How true is this, and what can Ukrainians actually expect in the coming months? Let's figure it out now. But for some reason, most people completely missed this statement, so I decided to return to it and analyze it in detail. All the links and details will be in the description under this video, along with all the official materials. There will also be timestamps, so you can come back to this if you need to. So what is Naumenko actually talking about? She said that an optimistic trend has started. Ukrainians are returning from abroad. And there's a small detail that everyone missed. We see that European countries are interested in increasing the number of our citizens returning under the readmission procedure. We have quite a lot of requests from Poland, the Czech Republic, and Germany regarding the return of our citizens, both men and women, to Ukraine. Readmission. That's a very interesting word, and we need to focus on it because, in fact, readmission doesn't mean that Ukrainians themselves want to return to Ukraine. Readmission is a legal mechanism for returning people who have lost their legal grounds for staying. And in fact, if temporary protection ends on March 4, 2027, then about 4.5 million Ukrainians will be subject to so-called readmission and forced return to Ukraine. Absolutely legal, absolutely lawful. And we see that the head of the State Migration Service, Naumenko, confirms this and even calls it a positive trend. Because really, it's very positive when a few million people are sent back to a country at war where rockets and shaheds fly every day. That's the story, at least for these people. Overall, today we'll analyze what's really happening and what impact it will have. And it already has a direct impact on Ukrainians, absolutely all of them, who live in at least these three countries, Poland, the Czech Republic, and Germany. So let's break everything down now. Subscribe to the channel, like the video, and be sure to share it with your friends, family, and acquaintances. Also, friends, I almost forgot. If you have any topics that you want me to cover in future episodes on the channel, write them in the comments. I will find them, I will read them, and based on your suggestions, I will also make videos. So that's it. And so, you understand what's happening. And before we start, I would also like to briefly mention our regular partner. This is the company TransferGo, a mobile app for transferring money from any European country to Ukraine, which has been on the market for over 10 years and is a reliable partner for all Ukrainians. So if you need to make any transfers from Poland or other European countries to Ukraine, use TransferGo. The link will be in the description below this video. And additionally, yes, they have now made a free guide for Ukrainians in Europe for 2026. This is a project by the company TransferGo, aimed at helping Ukrainians settle and develop in Europe. In fact, it's not just a document, it's a practical guide with real advice from local experts who already live in countries like Poland, Germany, Czechia, Spain, and the United Kingdom. Users can absolutely download this PDF guide for free using the link in the description below this video with exclusive information, expert contacts, and other useful links. All you need to do is go to their website, fill out the form, and you'll automatically and securely receive this guide right away. So grab it while it's still available for free. So now let's move on to our dear readmission. Readmission is an international agreement between states that provides for the return of their own citizens, as well as citizens of third countries or stateless persons who are illegally staying in the territory of the contracting party or have lost their legal grounds for staying. And here, in my opinion, the key phrase is have lost their legal grounds, my friends. That is, readmission is not some kind of voluntary return program for Ukrainians with compensation, tickets, money, as they say, Ukrainians will be paid to return home. No, this will not happen. This is a mechanism that applies to people whose status has become illegal, has expired, or has been revoked. Voluntary return is when the state offers some incentives for you to return home, and in that case, you decide for yourself. Readmission is when a European Union country makes an official request to Ukraine for the return of a specific person or group of people. So, what did Naumenko say? She officially said in an interview that there are quite a lot of such requests and they are increasing significantly. Now let's get to what exactly Naumenko said, the full context of her interview. Let me remind you, the link will be in the description under this video. She is talking about two things at the same time. The first is voluntary return. An optimistic trend has started with Ukrainians returning back to Ukraine, but where this information even came from is unclear. There are no verified statistics. And regarding this, and in general, there hasn't been any social context either. And her second statement is about readmission. We see that European countries are interested in increasing the number of returns of our citizens through the readmission procedure. We have quite a lot of requests from Poland, the Czech Republic, and Germany. And it's important, in my opinion, that she doesn't distinguish between these two concepts. Yes, but in fact, these are two completely different concepts. The first is when people make the decision to return to Ukraine on their own and come back. The second is when they are forced back to Ukraine. This is not deportation, but it's something of the same kind. Yes. Voluntary return and readmission are distinct processes with different legal outcomes. But in one interview, she puts them side by side as part of a single optimistic trend of Ukrainians returning back. You know, it's the same as if tomorrow they started massively deporting hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians back home. It would be like Naumenko coming out and saying, that's great, Ukrainians are massively returning to Ukraine. And she would keep silent about the fact that this is actually deportation, and people don't want to return to Ukraine. So Naumenko herself confirms that, yeah, that's the situation, it's official. That's the situation Ukrainians are facing in the EU right now. And, well, one more detail. Yes, it's about why I shared a guide to TransferGo, because it's an important detail. For example, in the Czech Republic, after Germany, you can't get protection. In Germany, after Poland, it's also not possible. In Poland, it's actually almost impossible to get it now, especially if you already had protection in some other country. So, for example, you can't move from Poland to the Czech Republic, or from the Czech Republic to Germany, or from Germany to Poland. You won't be able to do that because you won't be able to renew temporary protection, and this so-called carousel won't work either. Yes, since if you're protected in one country, another won't grant protection again. However, this doesn't apply everywhere. There are certain European Union countries that accept and provide repeated protection, but there are fewer and fewer such countries. And usually they are not so popular among Ukrainians because either there is no work there or the cost of living is too high. So actually, let's now talk about when the mechanism will be most relevant. Readmission will be most relevant for Ukrainians in Europe, and when the readmission mechanism can harm Ukrainians in Europe the most. And temporary protection for Ukrainians is valid until March 2027. The European Commission is discussing an extension, but even if they extend it until 2028, which they are most likely to do, and we have already talked about this more than once, it's just one more year and it's not forever. We'll see what happens next. But such statements from Naumenko are a serious signal. We can't ignore them because this is an official statement, not a TikTok video where it's all just hearsay, as they say. Right. Next. What happens to a person from a purely legal standpoint when their temporary protection ends and they haven't received another status? They lose their legal grounds for staying, and it's at this moment that the readmission mechanism becomes applicable. Poland, Czechia, and Germany are already doing this now. So, there's less than a year left, right, at this point, until March 4th, 2026, and they're already sending requests to the State Migration Service of Ukraine regarding the return of citizens. In fact, this isn't some distant future for Ukrainians. It's a process that's already started, that's already gradually picking up and moving forward. That's it. And Naumenko confirms this, that there's already serious momentum, right? So who is actually at the greatest risk after March 2026 if nothing changes? First of all, those who haven't received another residence permit, those who don't work officially, and those who don't meet the new requirements. Those who moved between countries, who showed up but weren't granted protection in that country and didn't receive any new status there. In fact, who does this concern first of all? People who are not working. This concerns, first of all, pensioners and people with disabilities. Those who cannot work, who cannot take care of themselves, parents with many children, and so on and so on and so on. And those who cannot officially go to work and cannot get accordingly a new status, right? Because it's based on work, for example. They can't do this because they don't have the ability to work. And all these people will be sent to Ukraine, where, as we understand, they will be left to fend for themselves. And I think it's no secret to anyone here, because we see how things are with internally displaced persons in Ukraine. Next, according to the UN, 41% of those who have temporary protection do not plan to change their status at all. They are waiting. These people are the most vulnerable. And again, going back to our previous question, these are still people who cannot take care of themselves. And these are the people who actually need this protection the most in Europe. But we see that this is just another way of pushing out of Europe those who do not pay taxes and those who do not contribute revenue to the state budgets of different countries. Next, a very important point is what Naumenko said, and I quote, "Requests from the European Union regarding the return of both men and women." And let's pause on that for a moment. Because men are a separate issue, especially men of conscription age. Yes, this readmission will take place not only through the mobilization logic, but through the readmission mechanism when everyone loses their status. So this will apply to absolutely everyone, women too. And this means that no status or gender automatically makes anyone safe. And that's what's important. Readmission is an official diplomatic request. It's an automatic request from one state to another. Ukraine is obliged to respond to it under international agreements. But here the question also arises whether Ukraine has the right to refuse to accept a Ukrainian citizen back under readmission. In fact, yes, if there are grounds for it. But the serious trend that Naumenko talks about shows that Ukraine processes all these requests, not rejects them. That is, yes, everyone will be accepted. And this is yet another confirmation that, as of today, Ukraine is most likely just doing what Europe tells it to do. And vice versa. That is, there are some behind-the-scenes agreements that we will never learn about in our lifetime. Next, about the closed borders, effectively closed borders, and the fact that you can't just move anywhere. An important detail that Naumenko herself confirmed, which concerns everyone who thinks, for example, that they'll move to another European Union country if things get harder here, if they start deporting people from here, and so on. That's all very cool, but in that case, you need to consider not moving to another European Union country, but actually leaving the territory of the European Union altogether. So as not to be in the EU at all, because usually if readmission applies, it will most likely apply to absolutely all countries of the European Union. So, probably it's not for nothing that I recorded a video about the top 5 countries for Ukrainians who are now living in the EU outside the EU. For those who haven't seen it, I'll leave a link somewhere in the description under this video. If you haven't seen it, you can watch it. And actually, what's very important is that these are not just some rumors from TikTok videos that are spreading panic. This is the official position of the State Migration Service. The systems of European Union countries are already integrated, and so information is transmitted between countries. And this is not, for example, the 2000s when you could escape from one country to another. In the European Union, you could hide there and no one would ever find you for decades. Now it's 2026. There are electronic databases, your fingerprints are everywhere, and they'll find you just like that. If necessary, they'll even find you using cameras. So that's why you should understand that if you need to leave somewhere, you need to leave the territory of the EU. Moving on. The practical part, as always, to be useful to you. What do you need to do right now? 3 main things. First, determine your legal status. Temporary protection until March 2027, or if extended, until March 2028, that's great. But what will happen after that is absolutely unknown. But waiting until the last moment is the worst strategy. I've said this more than once already. If you're in Poland, check if you can get a Karta Kuker or a Karta Pobytu through work or study. You can. If you work, of course you can do it. If you're in the Czech Republic, check if you meet the conditions for a long-term residence permit. If you're in Germany, check if there are grounds for obtaining local residence permits as well. Second, don't rely on moving to another country. Because Naumenko confirmed the systems are integrated, if you have already had temporary protection in one country, it is very likely that you will not be granted temporary protection in another country. And when you move to a new country without a prior plan, without any contacts and so on, it is very likely that you will not quickly obtain a new legal status there. And third, keep an eye, friends, on the official position of the European Commission, which in fact was promised to us by the end of May 2026. We have less than a week left. We hope that they won't delay this and that they will actually issue it, because that's when a concrete decision on temporary protection will appear. If you don't want to miss this news, subscribe to my channel. I will definitely respond. I will make a comprehensive, in-depth episode about this. Right. So, we have a situation where the head of the State Migration Service clearly and openly says that the countries of the European Union are interested in returning Ukrainian citizens back home through readmission. But we see that this readmission will only apply to those who cannot obtain another status. And as a rule, these are people who cannot take care of themselves at all. That is, pensioners, elderly people, people with some chronic diseases, mothers with many children, single mothers, people with disabilities, and so on. So, who is this actually aimed at, and who will really suffer from this remains an open question. And an even bigger question, why is the European Union doing this? If you know the answers, write in the comments. Share this video with your friends, subscribe and like. Thank you all, see you next time.